Okay, tonight we are gathering together. It's December, and our book club is meeting with a fantastic author, Alina Adams. Our wonderful crew. And Alinочка was kind enough to actually come and talk about her book. The book is called, let me show, My Mother's Secret, a novel of the Jewish Autonomous Region, Alina, Birobidzhan, who remembers?
Well, it's still officially a Jewish autonomous region.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And have you seen how many percentage of Jews? 1%.
1%.
No, it's not even 1. It's 0, 9. Okay, maybe the last time I checked something. 1. It's not even 1. Wow.
And we are going to record this session for people who could not make it today. But
Am I in the right place?
let me put it a little farther. And perfect.
Oh, this is very nice.
Okay. We're good?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So nice of you to come. It's nice to meet you. My name is Alina Adams. Well, actually, it's Alina Sivarinovsky. But when I first started writing, for some reason, the editor didn't think that was a name that most book buyers could just request. So usually when I do book talks, I give people a little background on the history of the Soviet Union and Jews in the Soviet Union, but I figure the people here have a good sense of that, so we'll skip all that. I'll explain. I usually talk about how we left Odessa and we went through Vienna and we went through Rome, but I'm sure here people either did it themselves or are certainly familiar with it. So I'll just jump ahead and I'll talk a little bit about my writing and how it came to be. So one of the things is I was one of those people who knew I wanted to be a writer from the time I was very small. My parents claimed that my first words were pencil and paper. They're probably exaggerating just a little bit, but I did always knew I wanted to be a writer. And one of the things is, who knows what is the advice that's given to all beginning writers? Anybody? Sorry? Well, that is a very good piece of advice.
Do it as a hobby, but get a real profession.
Excellent piece of advice too, but not one that I listen to. So it's what I tell people all the time, believe me.
I told my daughter about it.
Actually, no, this is what I tell people. I say if you can live without writing, then you should. If you can't, then you don't have any choice in the matter. I'm one of those people who can't live without writing. But the most important thing that people tell writers is they tell them, write what you know. That's the piece of advice. So when I first started sending out my books, and this was back in the dark ages before email, when first you have to print your manuscript on a dot matrix printer. Who remembers the dot matrix printer? Bzz, bzz, bzz. And if the paper got stuck, your whole book got printed on one line. So you had to stand there watching the printer. And then you ripped the stuff off the sides. Remember the dot matrix printers?
Yep.
So you had to print it out, and then you had to mail it to the publisher. And you had to include a self-addressed stamped envelope, so you were paying them to reject you. So I was sending out, and when people say, write what you know, what did I know? I knew about being a Soviet Jew, I knew about the Soviet Union, so I wrote about that, and all the feedback I received from editors was, nobody cares, Russia doesn't sell, write something else. But write what you know, so I was a little stuck. But then I got a phone call from an editor at Avon Books who said to me, Russia doesn't sell, nobody cares, but she said, you can clearly write. And she says, I usually publish most new writers in the genre of Regency romance. Would you like to try writing a Regency romance? And I said, sure. And then I hung up the phone and I said, what's a Regency romance? Now, if it were today, I would know, because Bridgerton is like the hottest thing on Amazon, and everybody knows what a Regency romance is. But at the time, I didn't know. So I went to the library, and yes, I was that nerd person who knew that the maximum number of books you could take out of the library was 8. So I got my 8 library books, and I read a bunch of Regency romances, and I said, oh, okay, Regency romance, it's England during the Regency period, which is about 1812 to 1830. It's Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility. Okay, I know what Regency is. What do I know about Regency England? Nothing. What do I know about Jews. I know about Jews. So I snuck some Jews into Regency England. Now, I did my research. Those of you who watch Bridgerton or read Jane Austen, there were some Jews in England at that time who, if they were wealthy enough, and not too Jewish, they would let them into high society. So it was technically possible, just very rare. So I wrote the first 3 chapters and an outline, dot matrix printer, bzz, 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 and I sent it off to the editor. And she called me the next week and she said to me, I love it. I want the rest of the manuscript on my desk next week. And I said, it's not proofread yet, because that was much better than saying it's not written yet. So I ended up writing it. I sent it off, and it was published in the summer of 1995. It was called The Fictitious Marquis. This is actually when my name, Alina Siverinovsky, got changed to Alina Adams. Siverinovsky didn't scream Regency England. And for some reason, Adams did, and she liked it because it was at the top of lists, alphabetically it was at the top of lists. So this book was released in the summer of 1995, and I went on with my life. I wrote another Regency. I wrote some contemporary romances. I wrote a series of figure skating murder mysteries because I worked for ABC Sports in their figure skating department. I covered the World Championships. I was in Nagano for the 1998 Olympics. So I did all that. And then a couple of years ago, it turned out that the Romance Writers of America, which is the organization that oversees romance writing, named The Fictitious Marquis the first Jewish own voices historical. What that means is it was the first time a Jewish author had put Jewish characters into a Regency romance. Now here's what I want you to think about this. So Julia Quinn, who writes Bridgerton, is actually Jewish, but she doesn't have Jewish characters in her books. And Georgette Heyer, who is sort of known as the godmother of Regency romance, she invented the genre. She had Jews in her books, but she was also very famously anti-Semitic, so I'm sure you can guess what kind of wonderful representation they had. So it turns out that my book, The Fictitious Marquis, was the first Jewish book by a Jewish author. And this was in 1995, not 1895, not 1945, 1995 was the first time that a Jewish author had put Jewish characters in their books. So up to that point, I really hadn't been writing books with Jewish characters in them, and certainly not Soviet, because remember, nobody cares, Russia doesn't sell. And then a couple of years ago, I was having lunch with my then agent, and she said to me, Russia is really hot right now. And I said, I can't imagine why. I don't know what's going on in the world. She also said to me, I'm talking to a lot of editors, and they're telling me they're kind of tired of World War II books. So they're looking for something different. And I said, so you want Jews suffering, but in a different place? And she said, yes. And I said, I can do that. So the book that I ended up writing that came out in June of 2020 was called The Nesting Dolls. By the way, if someone asks you, do you want to release a book in a pandemic? Go, not really, no. But it came out in June of 2020. And it was set in 3 different time periods. It was set in Odessa in the 1930s during Stalin's Great Terror. It was set in Odessa in the 1970s during the Free Soviet Jewry movement. And it was set in present-day Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. You know why it was set in present-day Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. And the people who read the book, they said to me, I had no idea what was going on in the Soviet Union in the 1930s with Joseph Stalin, because for obvious reasons, Western Europe got most of the attention in the 1930s and 40s and not Eastern Europe. So people were saying that that first section was really their favorite part. So when it came time to do my follow-up book, I decided I would focus the bulk of it in the Soviet Union in the 1930s. And when I was doing my research, I came upon a book by Masha Gessen called Where the Jews Aren't. if you're ever looking, have you ever read this in this club?
No.
If you're looking for a nonfiction title, Masha Gessen wrote a book called Where the Jews Aren't, The Sad and Absurd History of Barabajan. So I use that as my main primary research tool. And here's the thing, releasing a book in a pandemic, not so great. Researching a book during a pandemic, fabulous. There's nothing else to do. So what I did was I went down the rabbit hole of YouTube videos and reading primary sources. And so what I have here is I'm going to give you, for those of you, whether you read the book or not, this really isn't spoilers, it's some background history on how Barabajan, the Jewish Autonomous Region, came together. So I'm going to read from my notes because my own history I remember, other history I have to read. So in 1926, a document was released in the Soviet Union which said, in part, Jewish agricultural settlements has called forth a sharply heightened anti-Jewish mood. Let me translate that for you. What happened is immediately after the revolution, when land, as you all know, was taken away from the landowners and distributed among peasants and other people, Jews also received their fair share of land. To be fair, that was something that the Soviet Union did. When they were giving away land that they had taken away from the peasants, they did give some to the Jews who had previously been living there. As you can imagine, this did not thrill the peasant class. Now, as we know, the kulaks were eventually deported completely because they protested, but a lot of other people protested Jews getting land. So as a result, many of the Jews were driven off the land and they were driven into the cities. What happened in the cities, though, was they were now competing with other unskilled laborers for the jobs that were available, whether it was, delivering something or fixing shoes, basically. And we see this happen everywhere in the world. When a large immigrant population comes in, they start competing with the local population for the same unskilled labor of jobs. And that creates a lot of hostility, which at this point was called a heightened anti-Jewish mood. So, also in 1926, the Committee for the Settlement of Toiling Jews on Land, called OZEP, released an 80-page report where they basically said, we will take anything, because here was the solution. Jews are being attacked. How can we solve this problem? We will get rid of Jews. Very good. You got that. So the way to solve the problem of Jews being attacked is to get rid of Jews, so let's give them their own homeland. So this committee, and once again, the Soviet Union was very good at forming committees, but as we all know, any bureaucracy is very good at forming committees to investigate what they're going to do. So the committee released an 80-page report that basically said, we will take anywhere, send us anywhere, except Barabajan. Here is why. The land is unfarmable. It has gadflies, mosquitoes, midgets, to the point where the locals are constantly burning fires to keep the mosquitoes away, which makes it, A, very difficult to breathe, but also very difficult to plant. Also, the cattle are constantly being bitten by insects, and cattle that are unhappy don't give milk. There's not enough grass. So basically, we will take anything. Oh, and also, living in this area are ethnic Koreans, who have been there for a long time, and Cossacks. Because what happened was when the Cossacks were chased by the Red Army, they went as far east as they possibly could. Some of them actually crossed over into China, but so you have a Korean population that doesn't want you there, you have a Cossack population, and you have an ethnic Chinese population, because it's right on the border between Russia and China, and the ethnic Chinese are mostly warlords, because here is what can grow there. Poppies. What are poppies used for? Not their pretty red flower. So you have opium. So when you have opium, so you have Chinese warlords who have pretty much hired Cossacks to be their soldiers and enforcers in Barabajan. At which point the committee decides that the Jewish Autonomous Region will be in Barabajan. So good thing they put that report together. So in April of 1928, 504 families and 150 single people arrive. By May, 2/3 of them have turned around and gone back. That's because there is no infrastructure. People are literally living in zemlyankas, holes in the ground. There is nothing there for people, but they keep shipping people there anyway. In the summer of 1928, Birofeld, which is the first Jewish collective farm in the East, is established, and it subsumes a Cossack village called Alexandrovka. It is the first and only instance of a Russian settlement being turned into a Jewish settlement. As you can imagine, many, many Jewish settlements were turned into Russians. My maternal grandfather was from a place called Valta outside of Odessa, which was turned into a Russian settlement. But this is the one and only time where Alexandrovka is turned into a Jewish settlement. And you have Ikor, which is a collection of communes jointly administered by Soviet and American Jewish authorities. Yes, this is where it gets interesting. Americans were heavily involved in this project. In fact, they went around and they fundraised. If you ever go online, Swarthmore College has archives where they have photographs and posters that were drawn. Chagall, Jewish celebrities traveled around the world to collect money for this Jewish homeland. So it's mostly administered by Soviets and Americans. So in 1932, all the crops are flooded, they have no food, and all the cows die because the animals have no food. So it's 1932. Meanwhile, people are still writing prose poems. There was a poet named Bergelsen who lived happily in Germany and wrote beautiful poems and songs about how wonderful things are in Barabajan. Meanwhile, the cows are dead and there's no crop. Also, people are living in barracks. By this point, they're not living in holes in the ground, so that's progress, but they're living in barracks, which are basically just, two-story buildings. There's no running water. It's one room per family, and there's no windows, but don't worry about it because the wind comes in through the holes between the boards, so it's perfectly fine. And of course, they have a 5-year plan. Everybody loves a good 5-year plan. So the 5-year plan is they will have 3/4 of their population working in industry. So they're setting up factories, and some families are actually living in the factories that are provided by Ikor. Now here's one of my favorite stories. So this was going to be a gift from Stalin, and the Jews were finally going to have their own homeland. And it was going to be under the auspices of socialism, and it was going to be under the benevolence of Stalin. And so it's a socialist paradise. Work with me on this one. And all the Americans are selling their property and coming, because you have to pay a fee. People from North America, from South America, are coming to live there. And here's where it gets super interesting. So the Americans get there, and remember, these are Americans, these are dedicated socialists. They totally believe in this. And they're suddenly running the place. And everyone's saying, excuse me, why are you running? Why are you in charge? And the Americans say, because we provided the money. So all of these wonderful American socialists still cannot get it through their heads that the people who provided the money aren't going to be the ones who are going to be running the place. So by 1935, 8,000 people have arrived because of this massive, I don't know if any of you have seen this, there is a Yiddish language movie called Seekers of Happiness, which is available on YouTube. Speaking of the YouTube rabbit hole, and when I showed it to my mother, she remembered having seen it. It was made in the 1930s, and it was a pure propaganda film. And watching it, you can see that it wasn't filmed in Barabajan because they're showing lakes full of fish. The fish are so excited, they are jumping out of the water into their boats. They're so excited to be there. And everyone is singing all these happy songs. So if you can find it on YouTube, it's called Seekers of Happiness. It's in Russian and Yiddish with subtitles. So because of the propaganda efforts, we have 8,000 people arriving. And in May of 1934, the Communist Party grants Birabajan status as a Jewish autonomous region. And in August of 1936, Stalin says, everyone ready? Stalin's talking. For the first time in the history of Jewish people, its burning desire for a homeland for the achievement of its own national statehood has been fulfilled. There you go. It has been fulfilled. Stalin said so. Спасибо великому Сталину за наше счастливое детство. Okay. So they're working, sorry?
I was just thinking Nadezhda.
So they're working on building a city. They actually are eventually get to the point where they're building homes, they're building hospitals. Now, in February of 1936, they receive a visit from Lazar Kaganovich, Secretary of the Central Committee, Commissar of Communications, most powerful Jew in the USSR. That's usually how he's introduced, it's like that's his full title. So they have a huge welcoming banquet for him. There are plays are commissioned, there's poetry, it's amazing. He has dinner with the head of the local Soviet. He praises his wife's cooking. Everything is wonderful. All right, what happens in the Soviet Union when everything is wonderful? Okay. This is February of 1936. In August of 1936, the head of the village Soviet is arrested on the charge of, I'm going to read this, he has been unmasked as untrustworthy, counter-revolutionary, and a bourgeois nationalist conspiring to create a murderous, Bundist, Nazi, fascist organization, and he and his wife are charged with the most Jewish crime of all time, attempting to poison him with gefilte fish. So I know it's not very funny at the time, but it's kind of amusing. So in 1940, officials from Moscow come to visit Barabajan because remember in 1940, the Soviet Union has just taken over a huge part of Poland. Remember when Hitler and Ribbentrop and Molotov, they all decided Poland. So now they have a lot of Jews in Poland. And they're wondering whether they should resettle them to Barabajan, but they decide, nah, and just arrest them and send them to Siberia. So that is really the last time it has a major place in politics, because after the war, there's a slight uptick. At the end of the war, there is a slight uptick of Jews coming to Barabajan, most of them not wanting to go back to where they're from. There's nothing to come back for. But in 1948, with the establishment of the State of Israel, those Jews who really were committed to a Jewish state are going to Israel instead of to Barabajan. So, and as we were talking earlier, so Barabajan is still officially a Jewish autonomous region. And if you go, again, on YouTube, I did a lot of research on YouTube. It was a pandemic. What else was I supposed to do? You will go, and there's a documentary from 2012 where you can see that on the sides of the buildings, you can sort of see the shadows of Yiddish, so Hebrew letters, Yiddish being written in Hebrew. And this is my favorite part. So the area is now majority ethnic Korean and ethnic Chinese. And they shot inside of a school where these little children, 6, 7, or 8 years old, Asian, clearly visually Asian, are singing happy Yiddish songs. Because as the teacher explains, we're studying the history of our town. We're studying the history of our region. So you have these Asian children singing all these Yiddish Bundist songs. So it's actually, sorry?
I'm sorry, I'm saying people are learning Mandarin and they're...
Yes, exactly. They're not learning Mandarin, they're learning Yiddish. So the fact is the region still exists. As you said, it's less than, last time I checked it was 1%. I guess they've gotten even smarter. And it's even lesser now, but officially it has never been written out. And periodically these days, if those of you who spend your time on certain parts of Twitter, there are people who are saying, well, why don't they go there? Why are they complaining that they have nowhere to go? Why don't they have a Jewish autonomous region? It's from 1928. It predates the Middle East because, as we all recently learned, there were no Jews in Israel until 1948. This was a fun historical fact that we were all educated on. Again, I'm being flip. Obviously, it's because it's not funny. But you actually see people saying there is a Jewish autonomous region in the former Soviet Union. Why don't they go there? So that's the history behind the history in the book. And now I would love to hear, I don't know how you do it. Do you lead a discussion? Do you do a Q&A? Whatever is your way of doing things, please do it.
So I think because we have the author, we are going to structure it slightly differently. So first of all, let's raise the hands who read the book. Okay. So we have a handful of people that read the book. So of those,
and now who's going to commit to reading it as soon as they leave here? Okay. I actually
can you guys share what was interesting to you and maybe associated with that question to the author, since we have Alina here. And we'll start with Ira because last time she was last, but today she will be first.
Let's do it, Diana and Elena. They're always
Oh,
ready.
no.
Okay,
Lena is the first.
Lena is the
У
star of our...
нас две отличницы. Вот они.
She's certified, right? To give us summary. So I'll move the camera this way now. And Lenочka, so maybe can you summarize for us a book?
Oh my God. You're not going to ruin. Go ahead.
Like just the tidbits.
So basically, it's a story of a. I'm going to do it in front of the author.
It's okay, I'll look over there. I'll look at the corner.
Well, of a girl who grew up in Moscow in a nice family, and then turns out that she got entangled into this group who were very pro-Azerbaijan, and then her neighbor, and they were sharing an apartment. Her neighbor gets arrested, and the girl realizes she's 18, but they'll probably come and arrest her as well. So she grabs her things and she decides to run away to Azerbaijan. And when she gets there, first of all, it was very difficult. She didn't have permissions. She tricked people. She was able to kind of pretend that she was sleeping on the train, so they would ask her for her ticket. And then when she gets off the train, it was like in the middle of the night, so nobody asked her for the permission either. And right away, she gets into the situation where another train is passing by, and there's this guy who's passing out bread to somebody. So she sees that those people are hungry. She helps him, and then he drives her to the town or whatever, the settlement. So she gets there, and she gets dropped off at the house of the leader of the community. She expects to see somebody, and then it's a different person. It's an American who's in charge. And now we know why, because that was my first question. And then, so basically, this girl doesn't know how to behave herself. She's not sure about her choices. And she gets on his better side, and turns out that the guy she was helping at the train station, he's the leader, but he's being suspected for treason, or and so she gets placed into his employment to see if she could find reasons for him to be imprisoned or sent to Siberia or something. But she falls in love with him, and then there's a lot of different situations. And the descriptions were amazing. I did not know much about Azerbaijan. It was a very eye-opening experience. I'm very thankful to you for that, because, like you said, it was the first Jewish state in the world, basically, and that people from all over the world came there. But what they found, it was not livable, as we just heard, and it's described so well in the book, and the conditions. And these people, they ended up like, supposedly they're going to grow crops and stuff, but they had to do things with their bare hands. They didn't have any equipment, and such a difficult way of life. And even in those conditions, there was all this Soviet propaganda and all those meetings where they had to call each other out. So it's
Самокритика.
Самокритика. It was like tremors and chills going through me when, it's such a horrible thing. And so then this guy, the guy she falls in love, again, I think is the Arab, he does get into trouble through this Samokritika, and she actually shows his character, and they were supposed to send him to Siberia, and she's like, I think the war has started. He should just go and serve in the army. And then, like, not to admit to that, they couldn't say, no, he cannot go to the army. So they sent him to the army, and then she was so dedicated to find him. Like, she was pregnant, right? No.
She already had the
Not
baby.
yet.
Was not pregnant.
No, she had the baby. She walked with the
She had
baby.
the baby, yeah. So it's with the little baby then. She walks to find her husband. She becomes a nurse. Like, they train her to treat the wounds, again, with almost bare hands. then she actually finds him in the concentration camp by Germans, which also was very interesting because we read a lot of books about Jews and concentration camps for Jews, but this is
It's a prisoner of
Soviet-
war. It's a prisoner of war
prisoner
camp.
of war camp. Yes.
Well, if I just can give a little back history on that. There were prisoner of war camps that had Western prisoners and Soviet prisoners, but the Soviet Union was not a signatory to the Geneva Convention, which means while you could not work the Western prisoners and they got visits from the Red Cross and all of that, they could work the Soviet prisoners. They didn't have to feed them. So no matter how bad conditions were on the western side of a prisoner of war camp, and they were terrible, people were being starved, but they had to be given a certain number of calories a day because the Red Cross came and all of that. The Soviets did not have to be treated that way because they didn't sign the Geneva Convention.
Yeah, it was explained in the book. Yeah, it was very.
Well, there's no more Soviet Union, so I'm not sure. I genuinely don't know whether they're signatories anymore. They definitely weren't during the war.
So that was also, so this poor woman with the baby, she actually gets herself into the camp as a nurse, pretending to be Polish, who speaks with German roots, so they don't know she's Jewish. So and then she's still looking for her husband because he's in isolation, so she kind of gets a position of a dental assistant. Yeah, with an American Jewish dentist who is also, I guess, a prisoner, but I mean, they needed a dentist. So he was able to walk around the campgrounds, and so she kind of trailed him, and she was able at one point to find her husband, but it didn't, not the husband, Aaron, the guy she had the baby with. They were not married, but he was basically her husband. It's a long story. It's over 5 minutes. Yeah. So they don't acknowledge. Yes, they realize that they shouldn't. And then she also finds out that this Jewish dentist, American, was in some type of a situation with her husband. Turns out that Americans were helping out Soviet prisoners of war not to starve. So they bribed the German officers, security officers, and they were able to give some of their food to Soviets, which is also an amazing fact, which is thank you for that. And then basically Aaron realizes that Regina should not be with him, should not admit that she's his wife, and he sees that this American dentist has fallen in love with her, and basically he says, you should marry
Because the Russians are
each other, right? And yes, the Americans and the Russians arrived basically at the same time. And so she leaves with this American dentist, even though she doesn't feel that it's the right decision. And she lives a pretty good life in America. And then, so the story didn't start with her being 18. It actually started in the hospital when her American dentist husband was dying already. And then so this whole story then came out, and then they went with the daughter, grown daughter. They already went back and they found the father, Aaron, right? And basically it was a happy end with a lot of details. I mean, it's not a good summary. Definitely read the book. It's very exciting. There's a lot of information. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So, do you have a particular moment in the book that touched your heart that you would like to ask a question about?
Well, I think the most important thing that touched me so much is how dedicated Regina was to find and be by her husband's side. Like the things that she went through, like she carried this baby, she was like blisters all over, hungry, and like the situation she put herself into when she stopped the tank.
Well, I was actually telling Elena
There is a
on the-
Некрасов's think about, да, как есть женщины в русском селении, которые останавливают лошадь на скаку. Так she was a Jewish woman can stop the tank.
Well, my grandmother. So I was actually telling Elena this, that my grandmother claims that she did that during World War II. Was it true or not? I don't know. But my grandmother claims that she hailed a tank like it was a taxi, and it took her where she needed to go. So that actual detail, I don't know if it's true or not, but my grandmother definitely claimed that in the middle of World War II, she flagged down a tank. My grandmother had a very high opinion of her charm, and
Okay, thank you, Lenchka. It was an excellent summary of the
it was
book.
better than I could have done. I was like, that was really good.
Good job,
She's
ma'am.
great. She's great in this.
Irchka, what was interesting to you?
So I really, as you were saying the story, I really liked the part when like Aaron was, I think, infected and he was almost dying and he needed meds at some point. So she made her daughter, like she kept pinching her for her to cry because the doctors would not give any medication to the Russians. Like,
Told me it was time.
oh, the dentist.
Because they beat him up.
Oh, that's right. After they beat him up, that's true. So she
Yeah,
was
there's so
trying
many
to save
details.
him, right? Like she had such a big heart that she made her daughter a little bit like be in pain because this German doctor, he was obsessed that there was some influenza or some disease going on specific to kids, and if they get it in the camps, then it's like, you know, he was sterilizing everything. He was sort of like a neat freak a little bit. So she knew that was the only weakness that she can use from the doctor, so she used her daughter to get medication from the dentist. So I thought that was pretty incredible, just showing character.
Yaroshka?
Because we're talking about in the book itself, it was really puzzling for me, the daughter and mother relationship, right? First, Regina's mother is letting her go at 18, and she's like, Mama, I need you. She's like, you'll survive, your dad will not. So for me, it was a little bit of shocking. And then taking a 1-year-old to the, to save the husband, whether he's alive or not, and risking not only her life, but your child life, for me, was like, wow, like,
That moment
I don't-
also when she was potentially considering, like, oh my gosh, like either way it's bad.
Right. So it just even Aaron said, like, you have to stop being selfish. Like, you have to think about our daughter and not like my love and your love. It's not about us anymore. It's about this child. I was asking myself whether I would have been able to done it. I don't know. Yeah, it's like very controversial. It's a very hard decision. I mean, may will never be in situation to choose between but it's for me as a mother, like I would ask myself whether I could have done it or not. So this was, an eye-opener.
Can you also talk a little bit about the dynamic in the beginning, especially with the, was it a brother, I guess? Was the brother, or no, who's the Dimitri? Who's that? Dimitri?
No.
Sergei.
No, Sergei was a nurse.
Sergei
No,
was a
the
nurse.
person who talked to Lena, Vadik.
Vadik, that was her husband.
husband.
That was her husband.
Oh, okay.
Vadik was her husband.
Ah, okay. I understand.
And also, even she said, like, I never felt that motherly love from her growing up. It was more Tommy, who turns out to be not her real dad. He was more present in her life than the mother herself, So I think this was the mother-daughter relationship. It was very interesting
И
concept.
потом ее своя же, ее дочка, Лена,
Yes,
дочка
and
тоже,
yeah,
she
and-
decided to stay with the father and not with her mom. It's like,
Yeah.
Because
Well,
the
my
grandparents
mother-
were also very present, right, in the home.
Yeah, as my mother says, don't worry, anything you do for your child, you'll be wrong. So I was sort of playing with that, Regina chose one set of choices for being a parent, and her daughter resented it for it. And then Lena sort of swung in the other direction, but her daughter still resented her for it. So whatever you do, you'll be wrong.
There was one point in the book that I found both like funny, heartwarming, and I think I cried at the same time. When three of them, when the liberating forces came into the camp, when three of them discovered like each other's identity, when the dentist
Yes.
actually said that he was Jewish too, and I thought it was like so scary and touching because 3 Jewish were there in a camp in a swamp of hate. Like, God forbid if somebody somehow found out, 3 of them would be dead. And it was like at that one point that 3 of them like one by one they started like admitting, oh, like three of them Jews. I mean, it was like
Well,
really-
it's not as moving, but I so clearly remember when that scene came to me because I was in the shower at the gym and I was thinking about it. I know it's not exactly a move, but I remember that scene came to me visually and all of them putting out their hands and saying their names. That
Yeah.
whole, some other scenes come to me as I'm writing.
That was
That
fun.
one,
It
I
was
saw
funny.
it. It was like seeing the 3 of them sitting around where they only have have a few more days to live because if they don't get any more food, so they might as well die as who they really are. So that scene, I'm so glad that you pointed out, that was very nice of you, is that because that scene to me was the crux around which everything else spun.
To me, what I found interesting, I enjoyed the book throughout. I cried, I laughed, but at the end, when her original husband Vadik was, and his family were discussing Americans, and I could reminisce and like remember how when we were just immigrants and we came and they said, oh, these Americans are doing this way, and I almost felt some kind of kinship to that idea because we were not aware of the culture, and sometimes we still make fun, right, of the like American specifics versus Russians versus Bukharians versus like we do have our own antiques, and her relationship with the new guy, and I think you intentionally made his grammar wrong, right? Like when he was
Because he was speaking English with,
But the way that she was brave to embrace this new man in her life and just come out of somewhat abusive relationship, right, where she wasn't given. I felt like it was so toxic, and in the way that she was treated as almost as a child.
You know which detail I liked? She said, I don't know if I married him for him or for the family. She really craved that. Those parents were like real parents, which she never kind of, well, not her mom, you know? So that was interesting.
And one of the things is, even though obviously I don't think Vadik is a great guy, one of the things is I did want to give him his credit is that she says he didn't change, I did. So it's not his fault. He's exactly who she married. She's just decided she wanted something else. One of the things that I tried to do, my husband makes fun of me because he says Alina doesn't write love triangles because she believes people can screw up their relationships all by themselves. So when I do these kind of situations, I try to give everyone their due, because if Vadik is just a terrible person, then you're like, why is she married to him? Why would she be with him? I wanted to show, no, he had the qualities that she was looking for at the time. She changed. He stayed who he was. He's not to blame for that.
Will you write a sequel?
Well, I do have another book coming out in May, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end, but no, I think this story is very self-contained. I think it's sort of exactly, it starts where it should and it ends where it should.
Sergey and Lena?
They're fine.
You know, one more like a very touching moment was when they, at the end, right, where they find the note from Tommy that he knew that she was Aaron's daughter. Like that was mind blowing that he knew
Tommy the
it and he
dentist.
still married Regina and he treated his
And
daughter
that's
as
another
own.
example of me wanting to give him credit. He wasn't an idiot. He went into it with his eyes open. He wasn't tricked. He knew exactly what he was doing.
He loved her as much as she loved Aaron.
Yeah.
Which is sad.
But
Well, maybe not.
did they rob themselves of the intimate relationship because they were both hiding it, right? Like he was hiding it from her, she was hiding it from him.
No, absolutely. That's a great way to phrase it. Absolutely. The marriage they had, no matter how good it was and how hard they both tried, they had that huge wall. He was lying and she was lying.
And I felt like as soon as he died, like to me it felt as soon as he died, she was like, okay, let's pack up and go and find my Aaron finally. I mean, that's probably how, you know, but at least she gave him respect and she waited, like she didn't do it while he was alive.
But Aaron was very admirable character, right? He was so good even when time just sucked across all every relationship. He was so forgiving. I fell in love with Aaron, frankly.
I fell in love with Aaron as soon as you start to write about him. The first introduction of him.
And by the way, he was sent to Siberia because Felix got mad. He offered Regina to be married to him, and she said no. And then he
That
said,
was a punishment.
Right, so he started laughing, and he's like, ну, я тебя отошлю подальше, чтобы ты не мешался.
That's exactly what he said.
Right, so pretty much this was the...
But you know what made me feel so sad? Like, first of all, что люди жили в коммуналках. Это кошмар, это издевательство. И самое главное, что it's okay, right? We all speak Russian.
I lived in общежитие for 10 years with my parents when I was growing up. In one room we lived for 10 years. No. Сначала мы жили в общежитии, then we moved to коммуналка for a year or two, and then in Moscow there was shortage of apartments.
Это первое, то, что было ужасно. А второе, то, что люди, чтобы to save their own skin, они могли, друзья, ты не знал вообще, кому доверять, даже вплоть до своих соседей, или как там, вроде эти женщины нормальные, и вдруг они встали, чтобы, не дай бог, на них, это мы не можем сказать, вот они такие ужасные, потому что если нас сейчас поместим, что мы будем делать? And it's so heartbreaking, что люди должны были жить в таких условиях, и особенно жалко, что это наши евреи должны были через это же тоже проходить.
Did you go to Birmingham? No, remember pandemic, stuck at home, looking at a lot of YouTube.
I actually watched a video on YouTube. I sent you guys. Yes. Well, maybe I didn't send you this
Oh, it
one.
was you who sent it. It was a good
Yeah,
video.
but like now they have a museum. They have this and that. It looks like they make progress.
It's a modern city.
But it's a
It's a
man-made
modern city.
republic. Это еврейская автономия республика. Это все чушь. Like this land, like you said, really belongs to Korean and Chinese.
Это просто они не хотели сказать. Было такое понятие ссылка. И это Биробиджан, это была ссылка просто. Они назвали это красивым словом, что они назвали, что они объединяют евреев, дают им землю. Но это not our land. It's, we don't belong there. We never did.